Hey everyone, and welcome to Risky Business. My name's Patrick Gray. We've got a great show for you this week. We'll be hearing from Adam Boileau in this week's news segment. We're going to talk all about the last week's cybersecurity news. And in that segment, we'll also be hearing from Heather Adkins of Google. She is a VP of Security Engineering at Google. And our very own Amberleigh Jack will also be joining us in this week's news segment to have a talk about Russia's answer to WeChat. Let's just put it that way. This week's show is brought to you by Devicey, and Devicey's Sean Ollerton will be joining us in this week's show to talk about how enterprises out there just generally aren't prepared for Microsoft's upcoming end of support for Windows 10. So that's coming up, I think, October sometime. And yeah, that's if you haven't done it already, you're probably not going to get it done. So he's joining us to talk through all of that. That is a fun chat, and it's coming up later. But yeah, it is time for the news now. And Adam, the first thing we're going to talk about is Google's announcement that it's found a bunch of bugs in commonly used open source software. Now, I did an interview this morning with Heather Adkins of Google, and she's going to join. You know, we're going to play that in just a moment. But I just wanted to get a sense from you of what your gut reaction was when you saw this headline.
I mean, I think my reaction is, AI bug hunting is a thing that's been coming for a while. And, the natural feeling is skepticism. But that said, we are talking about Google Project Zero, who have, some amazing bug hunters and an amazing track record. And Google, who have all the compute in the world. And Google, who have, all of the training data in the world. So, like, if anybody is going to do an amazing job of this is probably the crew that's going to do it. So that definitely makes you think, take it a bit more seriously, right? And they're not going to come out with a bunch of crummy bugs. And we haven't seen the specifics of the bugs yet because they're still embargoed. But I mean, it's probably pretty real. And yeah, I mean, it's a wild time.
I mean, it was trendy to kind of like crap on this stuff a year or two ago, and it's sort of feeling like these days that's getting harder. So, as I mentioned, Heather joined me for this interview. We spoke just this morning, my time. She is, of course, in Las Vegas for the Black Hat Conference. And here's what she had to say about Google's Big Sleep AI-powered bug discovery stuff. Enjoy.
Yeah, so, well, first off, this is a project we call Big Sleep. It's a collaboration, a research collaboration between Google, DeepMind, and Project Zero. And many of your listeners will remember Project Zero's goal is to make zero-day hard. And that's precisely what they want to do with Big Sleep, is they want to start to apply large language models, modern AI, to the problem of finding vulnerabilities. The actual vulnerabilities have been disclosed to the projects. And, per our disclosure policies, those details will become visible once the projects are fixed. So I do not want to drop Ode today.
I mean, why not? Come on, let's go. That's what this podcast. I mean, look, I understand you don't want to give us the intricate details of the bugs, yeah. But maybe a sense of whether or not these things were, big deal bugs or little deal bugs, like these as in nice to fix or oh my god.
Yeah, so these are big deal bugs. And, if you want to give a flavor of it, the team blogged about a bug they found in SQLite in July, alongside the Google Threat Intelligence Group. That was a big deal bug being actively pursued by a commercial surveillance vendor in order to, cause chaos and mayhem. Look, anytime you're doing vulnerability research, you find a little bit of not big deal bugs and some big deal bugs. I think the team has wanted to make sure these were high quality reports and to make sure that, the maintainers are understanding clearly sort of how the technology is being, used, how the bugs are being found. And so those details will come out as the maintainers fix them.
Now, we had a bit of a chat about this yesterday. You were just like tipping me and say, hey, check this out. You seem pretty jazzed about this. You think that this AI stuff is going to really quite, change the game when it comes to finding bugs. I mean, it's been a couple of years now since large language models have been out there. I mean, why don't you give us your sense for where this is going? Because I feel like we're still split into two camps, which is there's the skeptics and the boosters. Well, you seem like you're in the booster camp now.
I'm in the booster camp, and I'm not optimistic about much technology on the security front in terms of what we have available to us. And so, to be able to see it applied in a real way that yields results that will be helpful for maintainers who are not security experts. And look, I think the thing that I'm really jazzed about is being able to defend against the threats we're being warned about at the moment. I'm here at Black Hat. Saw a talk this morning about how the bad guys are going to use this technology to build a mountain of 0-day. And they're going to sit on it and use it as they want. And I think the thing that I'm really energetic about is making sure that the good guys have the same technology to find those bugs and fix them. And you could imagine putting that really early in the software development lifecycle and actually reducing the amount of O-day available in the code bases across the world just to begin with. And I think this is maybe the first time I've been able to feel optimistic about technology actually working in that way.
It's funny, chatting with a mutual friend of ours actually a couple of years ago about this. He came up with this hypothetical, which is, what if these things get really good at finding bugs? Isn't that like a disaster for defenders? And I said, well, no, because it's going to be a symmetrical thing, right? Like, it's going to make finding bugs a lot easier for defenders too. So we're just going to have this really rapid acceleration in patching and improving software. I mean, hopefully there's probably going to be a bit of a messy period in the middle, right? Which we're probably on the cusp of. But is that about how you feel this will shake out as well?
I think so. And the thing to emphasize here is that it's still early research. And so the pace at which we're going to find the bugs is sort of unknown. But we also know that large language models are also good at writing code. And so there's opportunities all along the way to make this not only a discovery phase, but also a fixing phase. And I think that if you're an open source maintainer right now, that's primarily what we're using this on at the moment, as you can see from the bug tracker, it's going to get easier and easier to maintain your code. And I think anybody would tell you who's run an open source project that would be super useful.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask actually how the FFmpeg people responded when you're like, here's a giant bag of O-day, and then they have to go and fix it, right? Like, were they cursing?
Well, I'll leave the FFmpeg folks to comment on their own. They've got a Twitter account. You can follow them, and they've been,
nice.
been commenting. But I think we have also got to look at the long arc here, which is a lot of open source maintainers have been doing this for 20, 30 years. Like, they're going to want to retire at some point. They're going to want it to be easier. The next generation of maintainers are going to want it to be easier. I think this is a really good leg up for them.
So the idea is this will be able to write the commits as well. Something like this.
I mean, I think in an ideal state, again, research quite early, and I don't want to preempt any announcements from the teams at DeepMind and Project Zero, but I think it's fair to say you want to look at all aspects of the problem, not just the finding. We get the real impact by the fixing.
Yeah. All right, Heather Adkins, thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your time in Vegas.
Great, thanks, Pat.
Okay, so that's Heather Adkins there talking about all of that. I mean, I just have a feeling that the security industry is going to look quite different in 5 years from now, right?
I think you're probably right. I mean, the thing that struck me about that particular conversation with Heather is, like, when Heather says, I'm optimistic for the first time in a long time, right? And Heather's been at Google a very long time. She's seen a lot of stuff. And that's a pretty big call because, I mean, people who work in security are inevitably super jaded and super cynical and really skeptical of, anything that claims it's going to solve all of our problems, because we know how hard those problems are. So when Heather's saying that, it definitely made me feel a little bit like, oh yeah, like this is worth paying attention to.
Okay, so that's on the vulnerability discovery side. I want to talk now a little bit about the so-called AI pen testing stuff. There's quite a few startups now trying to AIify pen testing. And one of them has got a great marketing hook. XBOW or Crossbow is a startup that's doing AI pen testing. Their head of security is Nico Wiseman, who I think you worked with like 1 million years ago at Immunity. Is that right?
Yeah. I worked with Nico. He knows what he's doing, and that's some of those Argentinian hacker cats. Like, that scene has produced some amazing work over the years. So yeah, Nico's very legit.
Yeah. So Crossbow, they raised recently I think it was a Series B round of like $75 million. Right? So this is not some like garage project. And I think the thing that makes Crossbow interesting, and it's something we might have mentioned on the show before, is that by a few metrics or by a few ways to rank it, it's actually leading the HackerOne leaderboard, right? For bug bounties, which is, I think, very interesting, but also you sort of look at the way that it's achieving that, and it seems to be what the AI in the pen testing space is best at the moment, is going after fairly simple bugs at scale, which shouldn't be a surprise, because if you talk to people who do really well in bug bounties, that's their approach as well. Which is they find some sort of bug, they figure out how to, sort of auto-discover it the best they can, then they go out and they hit like 200 programs at once. So it shouldn't be a surprise that AI is doing this. But again, what's your gut reaction when you start reading about stuff like Crossbow? As someone who has like decades of experience as a pen tester, when you read this, do you start seeing the possibilities, or do you still say bah humbug?
I mean, there's always a little bit of bar humbug because that's in our nature. But like the reality is that most pen testing work isn't glamorous, finding exciting, novel, curious, weird, and wonderful, wacky bugs. Most of it is ultimately not very exciting. It's things you've seen before, things you're going to see again, and finding them. Like if you can get to the point where you can do it at scale, right? Because you've got here's a set of bugs, here is a way to discover them, and fingerprint them remotely or whatever else, and then go find them, report them at scale. Like, as you said, that is how bug bounty kids that are very successful do it, right? The other half of bug bounty kids steal source code using file read bugs and then do actual security work to find the ones that they're then going to report and don't say how they got them. But
yeah, no, that was totally a black box test, man. What are you talking about?
Like, those are your two options, basically: scale or, a little bit of, unsolicited research, shall we say?
And we're not talking about any specific incidents at all that are coming to mind, like at all.
No, not at all. Not at all. No one would ever turn a file read into stealing jars and then reversing source.
Never happened. Shut up.
So like this, you're right. This absolutely makes sense, right? If you can do this at scale, you're going to do it really well. The specifics of the kinds of bugs you're finding are that's really interesting to me. But the important thing is, if you can do it at scale, you're going to find it and also fix a whole bunch of stuff. And I think, Heather in the previous bit, talked about, it's one thing to be able to find this stuff, but then also being able to fix it, being also able to, contribute code or propose patches or review patches or even write test case, test harnesses, test cases, because it's a pretty similar kind of process to find the stuff in the wild and then also be able to find it in a test environment, test it against code that you're developing. There is a lot of real smart stuff here. And although it feels scary to someone who grew up doing this by hand in the mines, the old-fashioned way, it is still really exciting. It
is. I mean, on the Vuln dev side, or Vuln discovery side, I feel like that is going to be an arms race, and it's going to get messy for a bit as we just have, competing engines, competing models finding this stuff. And it's like, I think we will generally outpace the malicious, malign actors, as you point out, like Google Project Zero doing this stuff at scale. That's going to be pretty effective, maybe more effective than some amateur or quote unquote amateur, some cyber criminal trying to do it in their basement. So I think there's going to be some disruption there. And then you look at this sort of more applied pen testing stuff, and you just sort of wonder how long it's going to be before this stuff gets sort of glued together, right? And it can go from start to end. I mean, what I find fascinating is, we could be in a position one day where you ask an AI agent to fingerprint a target, figure out what software they're running, go find Ode in it, and get some shells. Like, that'd be cool.
I mean, that's what we did at work, right? When I worked back in Insomnia, that was the process. So, like, if you can do each one of those steps, even with some degree of automation, even if it's not completely automated, just reviewing a list of targets and then saying, hey, this feels likely, like, that's still a significant force multiplier. You don't have to have the AI do the whole thing. Like, there's some room for a little bit of intuition maybe, but, having tools that do stuff computers are good at and leaving humans to do the bits that humans are good at. And if we reduce that, if that balance changes over time as computers get better at human stuff, then, it's just going to be a force multiplier. So,
yes,
like, it's pretty cool.
Now, critically, no one is claiming that these models, either the Crossbow people or Google, are claiming that the models just did it by themselves. There was definitely some human involvement and expertise here. But I think, we've set up this conversation well in that this is where it's kind of going, right? Is it's going to be LLM-driven stuff for, various parts of pen testing and various parts of vulnerability discovery. where my skepticism hat comes on, like, okay, so it's Black Hat at the moment, right? In Vegas, and everyone's going to go off and present their research. And then you've got James Kettle's research. Upcoming talk is being hyped at Black Hat. I don't think he's done the talk yet, but that's coming, I think, tomorrow or overnight for us, right? How do you think AI, first of all, like what is, because we've seen a little bit about what James is going to present, and he usually got the goods, right? So every year at Black Hat, he'll present something that's really sort of devastating and fun. Devastating and fun, we like that. So first of all, what do we think he's presenting on? And second of all, do we think that an AI model is going to get to a point where it can do James Kettle style creative research and then weaponize it? Because that's the thing that I find interesting. I honestly don't think that it will, but I've been wrong on this stuff before, so I want to know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, so to answer the first question, he's talking about something that feels like probably request smuggling-y or whatever else against CDN networks. So I'm thinking like some of the big global CDNs probably have some like request canonicalization, request smuggling kind of flaws where you can bypass some of the controls or make requests to the back end. That's probably what it feels like. And in the past, he has delivered like cache poisoning bugs, for example, against, I think he did one which was like Mozilla's browser update services. So you could like patch everybody's Firefox with malicious code in the world in one go. So usually he delivers the goods, and we'll wait and see what the specifics are. Now, he has such a track record of really interesting and in many cases unique. I mean, some of it's derivative, but it tends to be derivative from his own research. So he'll like refine his techniques. And one of the things that's great about his work is that he works at Portswigger, the company that makes the Burp, sort of web security Swiss Army knife tool, is that he then goes and implements it into their tooling. And so that all of a sudden everybody can find these kinds of bugs in the same way that he has been working on. And that's really cool. And do I think that an AI collection of LLMs and a trench coat could replace him? Probably not. But I bet you there are pretty significant parts of his workflow that are amenable to being, automated. And things like, I came up with this idea, build me some proof of concept tools to go, find this, how widely applicable is this particular thing? Like if you can do that by tasking an LLM to go away and give me the data tomorrow about like how many people are vulnerable to this type of cache confusion or whatever it is, that's the sort of thing that feels like a, James Kettle sidekick. So yeah, I think, a LLM sidekick or AI sidekick for him, hell yeah. He feels pretty special. Like he's a national treasure in the UK, so they should, protect him and not let him be replaced by software.
Well, I think we both agree that ain't on the immediate horizon, right?
No,
but where it does get interesting, okay, so you were talking about it being his sidekick. What I find more interesting is the idea that instead of using a tool like Burp, right, which is your sidekick as a pen tester, you could have a little AI James Kettle. Do you know what I mean? Like James can teach the little AI agent how to do this, like request smuggling exploitation. And then you as a pen tester, you don't need to really know that you don't need to know the fingers on keyboards, the actual keystrokes to do that technique. You could just get the model to do it for you. And I feel like this is a better model to run a pen testing industry, right? Which is get all of the dumb stuff automated. You don't need to make every single tester an expert in every single technique. They just have to be familiar with the basics of it, and then they can get something else to actually do the thing. I mean, I feel like this is where AI is going to push us. With testing, I feel like it's going to be, fewer people doing high quality research that then gets, internalized by these models, and then they can go off and do the thing.
Yeah, I mean, the 15 years running a pen test company in me still says, like, I want testers who are able to, if necessary, go down to the, as deep as needs to be to solve the problem or to understand the issue or to give good recommendations. Now, is that actually necessary for 80% of the work that they did? Probably not. Like, I still want it, but maybe that's old man in me, and maybe it doesn't, like, for example, those testers didn't need to be able to replicate rowhammer at the hardware level, right? They didn't need to understand the, how many electrons are in the little memory cell bucket, right? That wasn't necessary. And maybe I'm saying the same things, maybe I'm asking the same thing here about, details of cache poisoning or whatever else like that. Maybe it isn't actually necessary, but, the traditionalist in me wants to say it is important that we understand as deep as we need to these issues so that we can give good advice and explain it. But maybe I'm old-fashioned,
But I mean, couldn't you get the models to do that part of it? I mean,
well,
I guess the
right?
point that I'm getting at is the hard part is actually defining these categories of things that you can exploit.
Yeah.
That's the hard part. Actually doing it isn't the hard part.
Yeah. And I think I agree with you. And in like, if you were starting from scratch with the security testing industry, given modern tech, then it would be ridiculous to suggest that you would do all of this stuff by hand and make humans do it, right? You would absolutely build tools and automation. I mean, Burp in itself automates so much web app testing, right? And is already such a force multiplier for being a web app tester. The idea that, an AI equivalent of Burp, something that felt like Burp, a Swiss Army knife that just does everything that you need and then leaves you to think about the problems and does the actual implementation of it. It's a pretty natural fit.
Well, I don't think you would have an AI equivalent of Burp. You would have the AI driving Burp, right?
Yeah,
and this is
built on top of.
But this came up in a conversation I had with Josh Camdew, which is in a recent Soapbox episode, Sublime Security, whatnot. They've built AI into their product like everybody sort of has these days. But Josh actually made a really interesting point, which is like, I've been joking about how no one needs to learn these vendor-specific query languages anymore, and thank God for that. And Josh made the point of like, well, you still need the query languages. You actually still need a well-architected product that can do the things. The difference is you're just getting the AI to actually do the queries. And I'd imagine it would be much the same with like an AI Burp. You're not going to try to re-engineer Burp and it's going to be this unstructured, unarchitected sort of mess where the LLM's just like YOLOing it. You're going to have an AI agent that knows how to use Burp, right?
Yeah, exactly right. It provides an interface on top of and abstracts out some of the complexity, but without, as you say, like it doesn't need to be one big pile of LLM that does everything. It just needs to have defined interfaces into existing tools that if you need to go and human introspect, you can, right? If you need to go drive by hand, you can. But that seems to be kind of where we're heading already, like with all of the mechanisms for gluing, model context protocol, gluing stuff into AIs and having AIs provide the kind of like human IO part of it, and then dealing with other bits of the computer ecosystem that were designed for humans. So ingesting unstructured data or other computers that you don't necessarily have the tools for. So in ingesting data that's in other weird formats. So it kind of, it's a pretty natural synergy, and it's uncomfortable in the same way that I imagine being a person that makes horseshoes probably felt at the beginning of the automotive industry,
Yep. People who touch computers for a living, probably going to have an interesting decade, I think is where you're coming from with that. All right. Well, that was very interesting, Adam. Thank you for that. Let's move on now because we've got other stuff to talk about this week. And this week, I think this is my favorite headline ever to run in one of our newsletters. And funnily enough, it was an accidental headline because I spoke to Catalan about this. I'm like, that was a really good headline. He said that was a placeholder and I forgot to change it, but it's such a good headline, which is China with the accusations again. So it turns out the Cyberspace Administration of China has issued a sternly worded letter, Adam, accusing America of doing heaps of hacking on it. Now, what makes this extremely funny to me is their very wordy post that we've linked through to. It's in Chinese, but you can machine translate it. Basically accuses the United States government of hacking their military R&D centers, which, I mean, oh no, isn't that exactly what they're supposed to be doing? Like, this is like they are accusing the United States of doing very tightly scoped and well-targeted legitimate intelligence collection that has military relevance. I just think this is, and the whole post sort of drips with outrage, and you just think, you're doing them such a favor here. Do you not realize that?
Yeah, I mean, like, you could absolutely imagine this post being tabled at a Senate committee about, like, has there been overreach in the intelligence agencies or whatever else, or are they operating within their scope? And it's like, actually, yes, the Chinese think that we are. Yeah, so it's pretty funny. And there's a few, other fun details in there, like one of the campaigns they talk about is compromising a military contractor, I think, using exchange vulnerabilities. And it's like, do you remember when China hacked every exchange on the planet in like this wild frenzy of compromise without really tightly scoping any of that? No.
I mean, you got to let the Americans use it to own one or two, like, come on.
Exactly. But yeah, they got domain admin, so good job, Americans, and had a rummage around, had some nice backdoors. Yeah, a few fun details. And yeah, basically it sounds like American intelligence agencies doing a good job, 2 thumbs up.
How dare they target our military research? It's just so funny. Anyway, people can have a read of that. It's linked through to in this week's show notes. Now, staying with China, this journo, Renee Dudley over at ProPublica, just keeps scoring the greatest hits lately. I think she's tapped into a rich vein of sourcing of someone either at the US government or someone either at Microsoft who just really has a dim view of Microsoft's business practices when it comes to doing stuff in China. Because she's got a follow-up to a blockbuster story about, Chinese support agents accessing DoD cloud. And this story is about, really, it's a very simple story. It's about the fact that SharePoint on-prem is actually maintained by Microsoft China, which is pretty funny when you think about it, because now it's China going around and owning all of the SharePoints. By finding a bug in the code base maintained in their own country.
It's a crazy time, but yeah, like the fact that on-prem SharePoint maintained out of Microsoft China, it's just funny. Like that's the whole story. And like, yes, SharePoint's going to be end of life and they're going to move to the cloud one, but do you really think there's no code shared between those SharePoints? And do you really think this is the only Microsoft product that's maintained in a country that isn't, the good old US of A? So, when you're trying to think about what your software supply chain looks like, it is, it's very nice to stop at the corporate boundary. Like Microsoft is an American company headquartered in the US, hoorah. But the reality is just a little more messy than that. And, Microsoft, certainly with that digital escorts thing, like they, letting the DoD and everybody else in the, in that kind of side and their customers forget about this, that they probably had mentioned at some point, very convenient for them. And I think, having to nationalize software development and kind of separate it across, geopolitical boundaries is the reality that we live in, but it's not a pleasant process.
Well, and I bet you they're still using Chinese support agents in other parts of US government cloud, right? Like it's there's no way that this is a practice that's ended, and we're going to keep hearing about it for the next couple of years.
I mean, in the end, they do it because cost and skills, right? And if they could hire everybody they needed at prices they were willing to pay in the US, they probably would. But that's not the world that they operate in.
Yeah, I tell you too, this whole thing reminded me of a conversation I had with an executive at a defense contractor probably 10 or 15 years ago, where we were talking about the fact that they were offering, at that point, defensive gateway services to China. And they were also, because they're multinational, they also did I think exploit dev services for the Brits. And I said to him, so you're trying to protect targets in China with these gateways while you're simultaneously trying to help the Brits own stuff that is presumably behind those gateways. And you know what this executive said to me? It's a funny old world. That stuck with me. Yeah, definitely stuck with me.
It really is. Yeah.
Now, what's this? We've been seeing some coverage. Catalan's written about this as well, and we're seeing some independent coverage about this too. Staying on China, is this idea that the US government is trying to build sabotage trapdoors in Nvidia chips or whatever. They're trying to pass some legislation that would mandate backdoors in the chips where the US could kill the chips if they popped up in the wrong geographic region in violation of sanctions or whatever. Is this a real thing, or is this some bill that's been proposed that's never going to go anywhere?
So it's a bill that's been introduced. It hasn't been passed yet. And it's is supported in the US legislative process, but it's one of these ones where the high level goal of the bill, which is to say, if you're going to ship really high performance, compute into other countries, we are worried about those systems being, ordered through fronts in other countries and redirected to some different ultimate destination and used against us. And we would like that to not happen. And Nvidia is the obvious target because of the AI future, but this applies to other technological systems as well. And there's been plenty of history of sanctions, evasions, and things using, by ordering stuff through fronts and so on. So what they want to do is to stop that. And how that translates is asking Nvidia and other manufacturers to have geolocation capabilities so they know where their products are, and then the ability to turn them off or restrict them or whatever else when they are being used in a way that doesn't comply with US export requirements. And the technical reality of that is kind of what what you end up wondering about. How does a chip know where it is?
Yeah.
And how does America turn off a chip if it isn't in a place where they don't like it? And that starts to sound pretty messed up. But
well, I imagine at that point you stand up teams that have to trawl drivers, looking for the, is this thing getting system information? Is it going to narc on me?
Yeah.
So that was my initial thought as well, which is there's no sort of practical way for them to do this. But then you think about how alive every computer is these days with automatic updating and this and that, and how complicated some of these drivers are going to be. I don't know that you would necessarily be able to prevent someone from, disabling your chips remotely and still get good value out of those chips, right?
Well, that's the thing, right? I mean, this, in my mind, it kind of compares to, say, copy protection, where, we are trying to stop people from, running software without a license or without a dongle, and that kind of arms race ultimately kind of failed, and we ended up with cloud-based licensing and so on. And that's, as this software becomes more and more complicated, it does become difficult to go and ferret out these things from drivers or in hardware or in firmware. And even the line between hardware and software is so blurry now because of embedded firmware and, Intel processors that have a whole front end that looks like Intel instruction set, but on the back end's a whole different thing with microcode and blah, 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 blah. This stuff is complicated, and ferreting out this kind of stuff is pretty hard, and especially with super tightly integrated, super complicated systems like AI, inference and whatever else. So it seems more practical to do than it probably ever has been. Yeah. And as you say, if you get this expensive hardware, then utilizing it in a way where you're getting value for money, and then also having to, dig through and find these it starts to become pretty complicated. So it actually seems like it might be doable.
Well, and this is why Beijing apparently not so happy. Not so happy about this. Beijing has asked Nvidia to explain whether its H2O artificial intelligence chips have backdoors that could allow the United States to position and remotely shut them down, right? So they are annoyed about this. There is some delicious irony here. After all of the drama we've been through with Huawei over the last 20 years. And now the shoe is on the other foot now, isn't it, Beijing?
I mean, I think the shoe is currently on both feet, given the previous story about SharePoint being maintained out of China. So,
exactly.
We're all so interdependent on everybody. And the idea of separating our technological worlds along geopolitical lines, is fraught with complexity. But we're going to have to do it one way or the other. So
it's a lot of
either that or we have to have world peace.
It's a lot of feet.
Which is more likely.
It's a lot of feet with a lot of shoes, as it turns out.
It's like OnlyFans up in here.
All right. Now, John Grieg over at The Record has reported on just some bugs in SonicWall's, SonicWall VPN, SSL VPN, presumably. That are really bad. They're so bad, in fact, that SonicWall's advice is maybe take these things off the internet or IP restrict them. And it's, that's great when you're giving that sort of mitigation advice.
Well, I mean, the problem here is they don't know what the bugs are.
Yes.
So somebody is ransomwaring SonicWall customers. No one's seen the actual bug on the wire, but there are people who have fully patched SonicWalls who've rolled all of their creds since the previous compromise who are still getting owned. And everybody seems to feel like probably there is some SonicWall 0 day in the wild, and if SonicWall doesn't know, what else can they do other than turn off our product?
Well, I like one of the recommended mitigations, step 4, enforce multi-factor authentication. Enable MFA for all remote access to reduce the risk of credential abuse. Note, some reports suggest MFA enforcement alone may not protect against the activity under investigation. So it's I don't know. They're just throwing ideas out there, man,
Yeah.
Gotta
the
love
best idea, not having a SonicWall in the first place.
Yeah. Now, some more serious research. This is comes to us via Cisco Talos. This is a write-up from Philippe Loheret. I don't know. I massacred his name. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Philippe. But yeah, there's a Talos write-up here about some research into, like, computer on a chip stuff in Dell, right? So like the Dell Secure Enclave stuff is not so great. Walk us through this one, Adam.
Yeah, so this is looking at the hardware and supporting software for Dell's kind of secure enclave, kind of like security co-processor kind of thing that they use to handle things like biometric authentication, fingerprint scanners, card readers, so any type of more advanced auth stuff. The researchers looked at the driver software on the Windows side, and then also the way that you talk to these things, and they found a number of bugs kind of going in both directions. So you can exploit API calls into this embedded system to gain control of it. And then you can also exploit from the embedded system back into the Windows. They found like a deserialization flaw, for example, where they can then turn that back into code exec on Windows. So this has a number of interesting options. One is for bypassing auth and privesc. So you gain access to a Windows system, and you can, for example, make the fingerprint pre to allow anyone in. And the demo video they have is very funny. It's a plastic finger with a spring onion on it, which they use to bypass auth.
I was hoping they'd use a hot dog, that'd be cool.
Well, I mean, the conductivity on a hot dog, maybe not exactly what they need, so maybe hence the spring onion. And then also as a like long-term persistence vector. So once you've got on there, hang out in the coprocessor, you'll survive a Windows reinstall. There is also an interesting aspect where physical access to devices, like if you pop the lid on a Dell laptop and you've got physical access to the thing, you can kind of plug into it and modify its firmware and then use that to gain access to the underlying Windows, which would bypass things like disk crypto, like BitLocker, TPM-backed BitLocker disk crypto, which, I know when in my, insomnia days, we did a bunch of jobs that were given physical access to a corporate laptop. Can you steal the data? So is it safe to lose this in a cab or whatever? So that's a pretty realistic attack vector for this kind of thing. And seems easier than sniffing it off the TPM bus, off the traces on the motherboard, like, we did on some occasions. So all of these things combined with the fact that Dell is one of the big US manufacturers that's very popular with US government and US corporations, like these things combined to be maybe this is actually quite impactful. So yeah, good work.
Yeah, I mean, it's just drives home too that like you don't see this sort of stuff in Apple products.
I mean, no,
you just don't.
Like the Apple Secure Enclave is a little bit rarer than this.
Well, and I think it's because you've got just such a center of excellence in Apple, because you've got the software people and the hardware people working for the same company, and you've just got this incredible core of security expertise at that company. And that's what it takes. Nobody is expecting Dell to be able to do this, right? And
except the US government that buys it. But
yeah, but what do they know, right? Oh man. All right, so just a quick story here. Joe Cox over at 404 has written up this story that I saw circulating on social media before he wrote it up, which is that some ChatGPT conversations that were marked to be publicly accessible, like shareable or whatever, somehow got indexed by Google, and 100,000 of them, and some pretty embarrassing stuff in there that I'm sure the people who generated those transcripts were not expecting to get out there. This is the sort of thing you expect to happen with any sort of new tech, right?
Yeah, pretty much. And I think like the interesting angle here was that we had seen reports that this feature existed and had been indexed by Google, and Google was delisting it at OpenAI's request. But somebody has already scraped out, 100,000 conversations or so. So that data is already out there. It's the fact that it's being deleted from Google now is great, but it's kind of too late. So it sucks to be the people whose conversations were scraped.
Okay, so now it is time to get into our last sort of discussion this week, Adam, and we're talking about Russia. And in particular, we're talking about how Russia has just, over the last few years, been gradually ratcheting down like control of its local ISPs and networks. We've reported, and particularly Catalan has done some really good work just reporting on these developments over there. Things like the SORM surveillance system and whatnot. We've talked about how they're cracking down on various CDNs that allow, it's not encrypted client hello anymore, is it? ECH. Yeah, it is. It is. They're cracking down on CDNs that allow encrypted client hello, which can be used as a censorship bypass and whatnot. And now we see that they're actually weaponizing the local ISPs and using their position upstream to drop malware onto foreign embassies based in Russia. And this is actually a pretty interesting little campaign, because what the malware does is it installs some like malicious root certificates into the user's computer, into their browser, presumably, and then that's it. And I think, this is the sort of thing that when you first hear it, you think, well, that's a bit silly. And then you realize it's actually pretty smart, because most EDR software is not going to be looking for rogue certificates, right? So if you can get some malware to do the thing and then just disappear from the box, you then have a persistent ability to monitor traffic on the wire for select, websites and whatnot, if you control the upstream ISP. So walk us through this one, because it is interesting. It is like, if you control the network, this is a good way to turn that control into surveillance.
So this is the Russian group Turla, which I think is generally believed to be the FSB. And they've been doing this type of thing with ISPs, upstream ISPs to redirect traffic in the past and some other campaigns. But this one's kind of interesting because they were, so they're in the ISPs upstream of embassies in Moscow. And in the initial connection process on a Windows machine, there's a captive portal detection thing where the Windows will go out to Microsoft.com through a particular clear text URL. If it gets a redirect to MSN, then it knows it's talking to the real Microsoft. If it gets some other behavior, it's probably behind a portal. So they're hijacking this request, sending you off to a thing that drops an exe file that pretends to be a Kaspersky certificate updater. So it says, hi, certificate update.exe, and if you click through, and if you're privileged, it will install it into your system-wide root certificate store. If you're not privileged, then it will kind of go off and get a second stage script that tries to use UAC to elevate access so that you can install that certificate, and then, as you say, disappears. And that's if you're, the naive thing is, well, I can run an exe on that host. Clearly, I've already won, but it's not that simple anymore, right? Because EDR, because all sorts of monitoring systems. But having a thing that's like one shot, and if you win, you've got a root certificate in place. That plus the fact that they're in the network, and now you can man in the middle any network traffic silently, is a super powerful position, both for access now, to communications, but also in the future, you can get in the middle of any other software update, of any other process, any login. You can steal credentials. That gives you so many great things. Great options in the future, given that you're already in the network. And as you say, very few EDRs are going to be looking for that. It's not a thing that, threat hunters are going to immediately go. It's not the first thing a threat hunter is going to look for. So, yeah,
what about,
smart.
certificate pinning might kind of help in these situations, right? So it's not
going
to be like, Microsoft.com services, for example, aren't going to be man in the middleable.
No, but it gets you a very long way, right?
Yeah.
Because not much, like cert pinning is very common in the mobile world, but much less common in the desktop computer world and in the Windows world, right? Because people do deploy enterprise certificates, right? There is plenty of cases where, break and inspect, is a thing that you might do in a corporate environment. So yeah, it's not like
so you've turned all of that stuff off, right? So one of the mitigations that I thought about for this and then kind of ruled out is, well, you could just tunnel all traffic through to a gateway in another country, right? And that might seem like a good solution until you realize if the Russians own the network, they're going to see that you're doing that, and they can just degrade your connection and make you not do it, because they can make your life too hard, and you will have to revert, right? So I think this is actually a pretty tricky one. You're going to need some tooling to check for rogue certs, like to get around this.
Yeah, and that's that tooling does exist, right? It's a thing that enterprises already have to deal with. But as you say, but
it's work. I think is my point, and people haven't been doing it until now, and it's just one more thing they've got to do, and they've got to now operate under the assumption that the network that they're transiting is, I guess we always have to operate under the assumption that upstream is malicious, but now that's confirmed. Right?
Yes, yeah. There's a difference between, in theory, and they are actively redirecting us and dropping EXEs on us, right?
Yeah.
That's a different kind of vibe. And, it's pretty similar, I guess, with any type of censorship, circumvention, all of those technologies and all the approaches for dealing with censorship circumvention also apply to, this kind of thing. So, Russia's very experienced at, as you say, degrading the connections, of pushing people around and kind of making it hard to do anything other than the Russian way.
Yes.
If you want to order a pizza or pay your taxes or, buy a parking ticket to go, whatever, park your car, they're not going to, like if you're in a VPN going outside of the country and then trying to come back in, that's not going to work. But there's all this pressure pushing you towards the way that Russia can intercept you and mess with your stuff.
Yes. Now, they have also just banned speed test, right? Because this gives the company that runs speed test a lot of insight from the inside out into what Russia's internet looks like. And we also had a story today in the Risky Bulletin about how Russia is banning the use of foreign ERP software. That's now being designated critical software. So if you're a critical infrastructure operator, you can't use it anymore. And it just seems that what they're doing is this gradual Russification of their own internet, right? So they're controlling the networks, they're doing more censorship, and they're doing this other thing, which is they're building an app called Max Messenger, or just Max, which is kind of looks a little bit like a Russia's answer to WeChat. So joining us now, and I'm very pleased to be making this introduction to the audience, is Amberleigh Jack, who is a producer who works here at Risky Business, who's been with us for about 6 months now, I think, Amberleigh?
Yeah, pretty close to 6 months.
Yeah, so Amberleigh works behind the scenes here, working on the main show and working on the bulletin and doing all sorts of wonderful stuff. And this week you've been looking into this app that the Russian government is putting together. What can you tell us about the Max app? Like, where did it come from? Is everybody using it? Like, what is it designed to do? Like, what do we know about this app?
Essentially, it's a government-backed national messaging service, which has been released by VK, which is the social media network in Russia, and back in 2021, through a string of deals, wound up with Gazprom essentially having majority shares in VK, which of course is state-owned. At the moment, it's pretty much a WhatsApp clone, but the plan is for it to become a super app where you can pay your taxes, you can sign government documents, you can talk to your kids' schools, you can do kind of everything on this app, not unlike WeChat. So I had a little bit of a look into the timeline of this app, and VK actually released a messaging app back in May 2022, and it really didn't take off. It didn't go anywhere, no one was all that keen. But in March this year, they came out and said, hey, we've got this messaging app, it's also got built-in payment systems, you can create chatbots and you can create mini apps and it's going to be great. And the next day a beta version of it was made available. And then in June, a law passes in Russia called the National Messenger Bill. And the law was basically made to formally create this national messaging app, which will have messaging services, but also let citizens have access to public and commercial services, confirm their proof of age. Again, not unlike WeChat.
Yeah.
That was in June. In the past month, schools have started testing it out. The St. Petersburg State University is now using it for all its internal corporate comms. VTP Bank is allowing payments and banking services through this app. And from September, every phone sold in Russia will have to have this pre-installed. And it's not super popular at the moment by the looks of things. End of June, VK came out and said, we've got 1 million registered users. And less than 2 weeks later, they came out and said, now we've got more than 2 million registered users. And 100% they're all real people. WhatsApp, however, has about 100 million monthly users in Russia. So
there's a ways to go.
There's a little ways to go.
Yeah. So one thing that you were telling me earlier, like when you'd looked into this, is, and you've already mentioned that, it's going to be the way to do business with various banks and the Russian government and whatever. It seems like it's one of those things where if you don't have this app, it's going to make life really hard. right? Like that seems, do you think that's deliberate strategy here? Because it feels like that's the strategy, which is we're going to build this app and you can't pay your taxes or get a bloody bank account unless you're using it.
It very much feels like it. Like it's hard to say at this point what's, with these sort of government portals that are migrating over, whether that's going to be the only way that people can use these services. But if you think about it, like you cannot communicate with your kids' schools, you cannot communicate with your family, you can't sign official documents without this app. I think you're kind of on the money there. It's not a big stretch to think that that's kind of aiming towards that digital control of citizens and thinly hiding behind, influencer endorsements and paid reviews.
Yeah. So we saw a funny post on social media recently where someone had cut and pasted in their review instructions along with their actual review about how wonderful the Max app is.
Yes.
Now, Adam,
even with those paid reviews, though, on Google Play, it's still sitting at about 2.6 stars. So,
oh man, some project manager's going to get yelled at over that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Adam, you would think surely that probably the next step here would be, to degrade those other apps, right? You would think that eventually just degrading WhatsApp users' ability to reliably send messages is what's going to drive adoption of this Max thing. I mean, do you think Russia could succeed here? Because I do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, it's the natural next move. Like once you've got a credible alternative, then you can start to push people towards it. And I guess WhatsApp is a pretty natural target because like American backed technology, it's pretty easy for them. There's such a lot of precedent for them pushing foreign technologies out. I guess where it becomes more interesting is when we see something like Telegram, which is a bit more aligned with Russian interests, but if they really want it to become universal in the way that WeChat is, like you really want there to be no other way to do things. And maybe they've got enough access to Telegram already that's fine. But, if we start to see moves against, less easy targets than WhatsApp, then I guess we'll know what's going on.
Yeah. Amberleigh, did you during your research into all of this, did you see any sort of stated policy objectives around this thing of like, well, it'd be good if Russians didn't use, Telegram or WhatsApp and use this instead? Like what's the policy rationale? Like how are they selling this to the public?
I have seen a few bits and pieces. One senior lawmaker, I think the quote was something like, WhatsApp should prepare to leave Russia. Or
yeah, right, okay. So they're being very subtle about it.
Yeah,
right. Okay.
Very subtle, Russia. Yes. Very subtle.
But yeah, they're definitely pushing this as the app to go to for everything, and that definitely seems like the plan.
Yeah, rightio. So there you go. That is a brief summary on Max, which is going to be Russia's answer to WeChat. And it seems like, I feel like if they can do this, that becomes then just the, if you're not in a democracy, if Russia's done it as well, that's going to be the playbook, right? Which is that the government will sponsor or co-develop an everything app or, give it to one of their cronies, right? In this case, like it's VK, which is now owned by Gazprom. I had no idea that had happened. But yeah, wild times. All right, Amberleigh Jack, thank you for joining us to walk us through that research that you did this week into the Max app. And Adam Boileau, a pleasure to chat to you as always, my friend, and we'll do it all again next week.
Thanks, Pat.
Yeah, I'll see you then, Pat.
That was Adam Boileau there with a check of the week's news and also featuring appearances from Heather Adkins at Google and our very own Amberleigh Jack. Big thanks to all of them for that. It is time for this week's sponsor interview now with Sean Ollerton at Devicey. And Devicey is a company that has built a platform that makes Intune actually usable, right? So the idea is if you want to use Intune, you can do it with Devicey and they can really help you with that. And they built a whole bunch of features on top of it. And as I say, they're just using that Intune plumbing and making it very, very usable. Now, one thing that's been on their mind lately is Windows 10 support is ending soon, and enterprises out there are just not ready for the switch. So it's going to be interesting later this year when Microsoft actually turns off security patches for Windows 10. So Sean Ollerton has been in the device management space for a very long time, and he joined me to walk through what's happening with the switch to Win 11 and how Devicey's thinking all about that. And here's what he had to say.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people are underestimating the change, or overestimating actually. So they think that it's too different to Windows 10. They think that the original use case was like, just moving the start menu, our users won't be able to take that. Yet most of the users are using Windows 11 at home by now and are well adjusted to a start menu in the center. And little things like that are just holding people back. They feel like it's too big a change. And also the Windows 11 is too new.
What they feel like it's a change in terms of like what, just UX, like or UI for the users. Is it like, or are they worried more about things under the hood and like their configurations and networks breaking?
I think it's both. I think they're worried about the user impact of the change and what they're going to do if it looks and feels a little different, which I feel is an overrated worry these days. Like, users are used to things changing without a lot of notification on their personal space. And so they're much more accepting of it in a business sense. But also there's those fears, none of our apps are going to work. And I think Microsoft touts something like 99% compatibility between apps of Windows 10 and Windows 11. And will publicly say that they'll help you to fix something if it's not working, if it's in that 1%.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of academic at this point anyway, right? Because if you aren't upgraded by October, like, you're going to have a bad time.
Yep. You're either going to be paying like a lot of money. I think the extended support for Windows is $60 a year per user, and it doubles every year after that. And that just covers you for Windows support. Your Office isn't supported if it's running on Windows 10 under extended support. So there's a lot of complications to just thinking, we'll be right to just keep running Windows 10, or we'll just pay for the extended support, because it adds up very quickly and it doesn't really give you the coverage you need to stay protected.
So how much of a problem actually is this, right? Because, okay, we're sitting here saying, okay, there's people out there still running Win 10, but are there a lot of organizations running Win 10? Do they tend to be like disorganized sort of, smaller companies in cash-strapped verticals, or is this like a problem in mainstream big enterprise?
The stats out there say that over 50% of enterprise devices are still running Windows 10.
My God, man.
And if you look at it, there's like something like 80% of businesses haven't moved fully yet. So some of them might be on the journey and not finished, but others haven't even started. And I kind of think if you're an organization of any sort of decent size, if you haven't started yet, then you're too late to get it done by the deadline.
You're not going to make it. So, I mean, what is the process, I guess, for doing these massive upgrades through an organization? Obviously, we'll talk about the way that you can do that via Intune, because Devicey is built on Intune. But what are some of the other ways? Like, because I'm not in Windows land. I mean, I haven't touched a Windows computer in so long, except for helping an elderly neighbor with an issue which I had to fumble around. I actually managed to nail it too. It worked in the end, thank God. But what's the process if you've got an entire Win 10 fleet out there? I mean, I imagine it's not as hard as it was, back in the day, right? Because Microsoft's built all of these wonderful, all singing, all dancing management tools. Say you're not even an Intune shop. I imagine it's still quite a sort of, it's something you could bite off and chew. It's not the end of the world, right?
It's not, but there's some key pieces that you do need to get on top of early in the piece. So one of the big changes with Windows 10 to Windows 11 is some security hardware requirements. So Windows 11 has a hard requirement for a TPM chip in the device, which then comes with some sort of flow-on effects of minimum processor levels and things like that. And so there is some physical hardware that is incapable of running Windows 11. And so
that's your first step, is make sure you've actually got hardware that'll run it.
Yep. And Microsoft has some tools for gathering that information, depending on the way you're managing those devices at the moment. You can see at a glance, okay, am I even ready to upgrade to Windows 11? And that's probably an even bigger concern because of how big a change it is and the fact that everyone needs to do it. A lot of hardware vendors are sort of touting, if you didn't have your devices ordered at the beginning of the year, then you wouldn't have got them by the October deadline. So if you're in a situation where you've got a lot of hardware that's not going to support Windows 11, then you're really you're going to have to go down a path of mitigation while you work through that. But look, you got to be talking 5+ year old hardware that's not going to support it, right? Anything that's of any decent age is going to have the right elements to it. So most organizations, I feel, are at least going to be having capable hardware to upgrade.
Yeah. So once you understand that you've got the correct hardware in place, I imagine that it's a fairly easy process to roll out some sort of upgrade package, right? Like it's not, is it a nuke and rebuild, or is it just like something you drop on Win 10 and it goes and does the thing in the background while the user's at home and then on Win 11?
I think in best case scenario, you're starting fresh. You're doing a nuke and rebuild in a monitored and managed platform. Again, from a timing perspective, it is possible to just do some in-place upgrades and get to that supported state while you're now working on what's your new way of building machines moving forward.
Yeah, right. Okay. Now, tell me about the Intune way of doing this, because I'd imagine like in Microsoft's dream world, everyone's using Intune, and fair enough too, because it's actually quite a powerful and awesome platform. Like it's very, very good. And of course, for those who aren't familiar, Devicey, the company you work for, that's what you've done is take this plumbing of Intune and actually make it somewhat usable. I guess also a bit of a hybrid service in that Devicey will help you if you're trying to do a project or roll out a new app or make some configuration changes or whatever. Like you're there to help people. But really, the key thing is you've sort of made Intune something that's much more usable. So what does the process look like? With Intune when you're just trying to upgrade like a fleet of say 10,000 boxes that are all singing and swimming and dancing and very, very happy and Intune enrolled? I imagine that is like exquisitely simple, really. But then again, you tell me.
No, it is. And if you're in Intune in that state already, then you're going to have access to that Windows Update Readiness reporting that will tell you, okay, we're good to go. And then it's as simple as just like rolling out a regular monthly update. So enabling the feature upgrade to go from Windows 10 to Windows 11, you can pick the release. A lot of people are still not quite happy with 24H2, although I thoroughly recommend it. The next release is about to drop in a month or two. So if you don't go with that one now, you're going to be one behind almost straight away. And so create a feature update. Think about your rings, right? You want to make sure you're rolling it out to a select group, a pilot group first, and getting it tested and vetted that there's no showstoppers in your environment. Then you want to expand that to your user acceptance group.
Is that all sort of built in via Intune, or is that more of a Devicey feature like the ringed rollout stuff?
No, look, that's built into Intune. So you can create your groups, you set your delay times, and you can Intune will then handle the rollout in a staged approach based on the members of those groups. Devicey obviously helps with getting that configuration to a best practice state, but we're just using the Intune plumbing underneath, like you said.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of the whole point of Devicey, right? Which is what I was trying to explain, which is like Intune will do all of this stuff, but like, good luck figuring it out, right? Without some extra tooling. So like, how bad is this going to get, right? Because you seem like, you're a very calm person, but you seem a little bit freaked out about what's going to happen in October, right? Like, I think what you seem to be saying is like, this is a bigger problem than people realize, and there's a lot of companies that aren't going to be ready. I mean, what are the odds that Microsoft says, okay, we'll give you another few months? Because they have done that in the past, right?
They have. I don't think they've done it at this level. You look at, the last time this happened was Windows 7 to Windows 10.
Yeah.
And there was the same level of, not freak out, but the same level of Windows 10 isn't ready and we can't move away from Windows 7. Why are we ending it? And then now we're at the same boat again, right? It's just history repeating. And I think that organizations are underestimating the impact that it's going to have, right? Yep, come October, nothing's going to stop working, nothing's going to break. But suddenly, if there is a vulnerability or if there is something that needs patching, Microsoft answer is going to be, we'll fix it in Windows 11. And now, if you're an org that is still on a fleet. If you've got 10,000 Windows 10 devices out there, and every single one of those is vulnerable to something that's now out there in the wild and known and isn't getting a patch, you're either, you're stuck with forking out a whole lot of money, and Microsoft might fix it, or suddenly rushing this process that, if it's done in a controlled way, is quite a simple upgrade.
Hey, just one more question too on Intune. Like, what licensing tiers get it? Is it across all licensing tiers? Is Intune just something that's like, well, because it's native, it's like a native Windows thing, like everyone gets it? Or do you have to be on some sort of E5 license or something to get it at no extra cost?
It's pretty broad. So, like, it's part of Business Premium, it's part of E3, E5.
Yeah, okay.
A lot of the frontline worker, the F SKUs get it. Like, the F1s have Intune built into them. So it's pretty broad. It's not just a blanket. The other part of it where you have advantages if you're on something like an E3 or an E5 is having that Windows Enterprise license underneath as well that unlocks some additional capabilities within Intune. But just general.
So really, what's your excuse?
Exactly, right?
Is the question, right? Like, okay, well, you heard it here first. Windows 10 users, repent. For Judgment Day is coming. Sean Ollerton, thank you so much for joining us to have a chat about that. Very interesting stuff.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
That was Sean Ollerton from Devicey there. Big thanks to him for that, and big thanks to Devicey, a fine Australian company, for being this week's sponsor. And that is it for this week's show. I do hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back next week with more security news and analysis, but until then, I've been Patrick Gray. Thanks for listening.